This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. This is Razib Khan with the Unsupervised Learning podcast, and I am here with returning guest, Kat Rosenfield, who I had just said, actually, before we got on, we have not talked in 3 years, which means that that's been a really, really long time in internet time, in the culture space, which is where I mostly know her from. She is a novelist, as you guys know. I think her last novel was No One Will Miss Her. Was that your last novel?
It was You Must Remember This, but I have a new one coming out in March.
Okay. Yes. I think You Must Remember This is the one that you were promoting when you came on last time, and you have a new one. Okay, so you have like this parallel career, which, like, to be honest, I don't know as much about. People. Well, I mean, actually, I don't know how Goodreads works. I know there's a lot of controversies relating to that, but I mean, the people I know say the novels are great. So there's that whole other thing that you do, but you also, comment on these cultural things. I mean, I see you at UnHerd. I think you're still a columnist at Free Press, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean that makes sense. In terms of your current brand. I found out about you through Blogging Heads, and I did not realize that the Blogging Heads site is gone now. I guess it's all on YouTube.
Yeah. I think they folded up, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on over there now.
Well, I think so. I looked at Wikipedia, and Wikipedia said Blogging Heads basically, like, Bob Wright announced that it was ending in 2022, and I think he has an archive. When were you first on Blogging Heads?
I want to say 2018. That seems like what it was, because Phoebe and I, my co-host of the Feminine Chaos podcast, Phoebe Maltzbovi, she and I were invited to go on Blogging Heads first as a one-off, just to have a conversation about something that we'd been talking about on Twitter. And I think it was Aria Cohen-Wade, who was like a producer there at that time, said, would you guys be interested in podcasting about this? And I didn't really know what a podcast was. I was like, sure, yeah, mail a podcast to my house. I'll do it. Like, what, how does this work? And then it, I guess, did pretty well, and so we were invited to just to join
a
them.
Show.
Yeah.
So I think you guys, there were like regular shows there between the DMZ with like Bill Schur and Matt Lewis is another one. So there are these, and like John and Glenn, the black guys at Blogging Heads, which, like, now there's the Glenn show. So you have your, I did not mention your Substack. I mean, it's on Substack. That's how I think of it. Feminine Chaos, the podcast, it's on Substack, right? It's hosted on Substack. So you're doing that with Phoebe. You've done that. So I guess, well, I mean, in some way for like 7 years. Oh, that's a long time.
Which is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is weird. Anyway, we did meet last fall at Hereticon. Should I say? No, I think we both said we were at Hereticon. We can say that. Hereticon has those weird rules. You can't talk about what people say or whatever. Or
right. It's like Fight Club.
Yeah, but I think it was tweeted out, like, who was there in general. So we were there. You are a person of smallness. Just that was true. Because you did say, like, I think on Feminine Chaos you'd be like, because I'm short or something. I was like, okay, and like, things like abstractly, and then you meet someone and I'm looking down at you and I'm like, yeah, she's short. So
yeah. I prefer petite.
Okay,
but yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, we're okay with sensitive language here. It's up to whatever you want to. It's called politeness, not political correctness. So we're in 2025 as we're recording in the summer. I guess, like, the big thing that was just happening recently was the Sydney Sweeney Good Genes ad. I want to ask you, though, really quickly, kind of like a meta question. You are, we've talked about this, and I think everyone who knows your content knows this. You're basically an old school liberal. You would I don't think you've actually, I don't know what who you voted for. That's not really relevant, but it's like, you're the type of person that's probably gonna, you would expect to probably continue voting Democratic, but you have gotten into these tussles with the cultural left, the identitarian left, maybe. And I mean, it's like you, my friend Sarah Hyder, there's like a certain type of, frankly, liberal. You're the type of people that get really, really on the nerves of the identitarian, because the stuff that I see you getting dunked on about or your replies are just so incredibly obnoxious. And I never see anything like that. I have different genres of obnoxiousness, but those people, like, we don't like intersect enough, whereas you're close enough that they really hate you. And so, do you think that's the correct characterization?
I mean, hate's a funny word. There is a parasocial loathing thing going on. And
Well,
it's
they
interesting.
they perform it online. They perform it
You
on. So that'd be
mentioned
nice to see online.
Sarah.
Yeah.
And I think that she's actually, I'm honored to be in any kind of club with her. I think she's an excellent and fierce thinker. But I think that we do sort of similarly, like, as you were saying, get on the nerves of a certain type of person because we are both women. And so there's this expectation that we're going to toe certain lines and then we don't. And there's a certain type of person on the left, I want to say very specifically a certain type of man on the left, who finds that really intolerable and who will sort of use this as an opportunity. I think that these guys, this is maybe uncharitable of me, but in my experience, it is true. These guys are just dying to take the gloves off on some lady. They really want to go after some woman. They have a lot of aggression, and when they feel like they've been given an opportunity and a kind of a sanctioned opportunity to do that, they will take it and then some.
I have seen that. It's I'll use the word interesting. It's an interesting phenomenon to observe. And in terms of like sexism, I think I will say, I mean, people are gonna, some of my listeners are gonna be like, "Oh, you're a squish, you're a lib, Razib." But in terms of sexism, the issue here is it does exist, and kind of the everything is sexist, kind of means it's hard to actually point out it when it really does. When something is really out of line. Like, there are certain things you're like, "Oh, is that sexist?" And like you have to do a complex analysis,
Mhm.
and like I'm just like, "Okay, what are you doing here? You're just trying to look for something, okay?" But then there's like cases where I've seen like you and Sarah get denked on, and it's just like, you would not talk to them that way if they were men. I mean, it's
Mhm.
like you can see it's there. So, I mean, I will say, as someone who's more on the cultural right, I mean, I don't deny the sexism or racism or all of these isms that the left is preoccupied with. I mean, the right is preoccupied with classism a lot of times, actually. I mean, we're all preoccupied with isms, and isms do exist. It's how you deal with them, how you think society should deal with them, and what is the magnitude of it, right? So I think so. For example, my friend Megan McCardle, who I've had on the podcast, she's libertarian, and she's not a big type of person to be like, "Oh, I can't believe that you were so sexist," and all that stuff. But like some of the stuff that people have said to her, it's kind of it's very I would say there's a belittling tone that I have seen directed towards women that is just stereotypically what you would kind of expect from like sexism. And so I mean that's again, like I'll say, it's interesting to watch. Like human nature doesn't change, no matter in some ways, and if that impulse is there, if that muscle is there, I guess they feel in certain cases with, say, you, Sarah, or Megan, they can use it. They get a pass,
Mhm.
because you guys are coded as the other team, which you're kind of not. I mean, also, I think, you expressed your opinion on, look, I don't perceive you as like a team player. Like you're not like, like on a political think tank or something, right? You're independent. I mean, how are you? So in the 3 years, we have had a backlash. So, you said you're doing Feminine Chaos. You started doing it. Well, I mean, you might not have called it that, but whatever. You and Phoebe started doing your thing in 2018, and I know you were already in the YA culture wars zone by then, right? In terms of you had started commenting and observing things.
Yeah, so I started out as a young adult novelist, and that was my first book was published in 2012. And so I was sort of well positioned to see what was happening in the culture, because a lot of the stuff that really kind of broke out into the mainstream, starting especially after the election of Donald Trump, and then like in, furious manner in 2020, that was all incubating in the young adult fiction world first. And I have some theories about why that is. I think that when you have content aimed at young people or aimed at children, that if you're going to have a moral panic, oftentimes it will sort of take root there first, because it's easy to get yourself kind of worked up over like the idea of some vulnerable child being harmed. And once you have a little bit of a root there, then things can start to kind of bloom out more broadly. But yeah, so in 2016, I was still a young adult novelist and a reporter for MTV News. I didn't really have anywhere near the profile that I have now. And so I was just sort of a fly on the wall in these spaces where people were talking about young adult fiction specifically, seeing this incredibly censorious impulse start to take over, seeing what we would now refer to as like woke taking over. And it was, like I said, it was censorious, it was punitive, it was really anti-classical liberalism, anti-free expression. And I, at the time, expressed that I didn't think it was good that this was happening. And I didn't, it's not like I really got into like a fight specifically with anybody, but I discovered that like a very intense orthodoxy had taken hold in young adult fiction. And I had run afoul of it by saying that what was going on, these campaigns specifically to cancel books or to cancel authors for running afoul of progressive politics, I was like, this is book banning. And people were like, how dare you? And I was sort of excommunicated. But the fact that that happened and that there was this just intense policing happening in that community was very interesting to me as a journalist. And that was how I ended up moving more into writing about culture, because before that I was an entertainment journalist. It was very much just like reporting casting news, or writing about like some new movie that was coming out, or this or that Hollywood couple who was breaking up or making up. So getting more into kind of analyzing what was happening, trying to understand what was happening in the culture and what it meant, that was where I really began getting interested in doing that and doing it professionally.
Yeah. And so, I wanted to set the date actually in terms of like when you kind of started getting involved into it, commenting on these sorts of things, because I think you saw, let's say from 2018 to we are recording the middle of 2025. It's like over this period, you saw the tail end, I would say of the awakening, of the rise of woke culture, probably arguably peaked around BLM summertime, and then kind of slowly started declining, and then it started declining faster. And so now, we are in a different time, and fundamentally you're still a liberal, and but you're still commenting on some of these issues where it seems like the Sydney Sweeney Good Genes ad is like a mini reemergence of the woke tendencies. I mean, I kind of feel it's a little bit silly, but it's not just online if The Atlantic is writing about it, I guess. It's one of those things where, everything online does not become, into the mainstream publications, into real life and stuff like that. But, a lot of stuff now does start online. So it's, you can't just like dismiss it for that. How are you feeling though, in terms of your positionality where you are? I mean, you're still a young woman. You still have a long career ahead of you. I mean, Glenn Lowry has been around for a long time, and he's been a conservative, liberal, and now not. Well, actually, I think he was a liberal. He was a Marxist, then he was a conservative, then he was a liberal, and now he's a conservative. So it's like, people don't get to have multiple arcs and kind of maintain a common thread. How are you feeling with I want to call it like anti-wokeness. I mean, some of this is pretty obnoxious, to be candid. Like, as someone who's more on the right, there's some stuff going on out there, and I'm not like a big fan of it personally. Maybe it's an age thing. Maybe it's the way the internet and the algorithm on Twitter X is. But like, how do you feel in terms of commenting on Culture Wars, now that we are in a different stage where wokeness is a much more marginal force, I think, at least in elite organs where it was taken as the given, and now it's not. Like if you go to a DSA meeting or whatever, obviously, but AOC removed her pronouns, which I don't think it's like necessarily a deep change, but it's a signifier, I guess, or it's an illustration of what's going on. So, I've been talking for a while. Like, tell me how you're feeling.
I mean, I think it's all very interesting. This is sort of, this is a benefit to not being a super political creature. I have my ideas about what kind of society I would like to live in, but when it comes to having kind of prescriptive politics, I'm just very aware that all of the problems that plague society are things that we've been dealing with for as long as human beings have making societies. And I think, or rather my theory is that these problems are not solvable. They're endemic. They are, they just go with the territory of being people in the world. And people much smarter and wiser than me have attempted to solve them throughout, centuries and not been able to do so. And so I'm not out here like, well, I know how to fix it. I have absolutely no idea how to fix it. I am content to just try to understand what is happening and what it means, and why, And so in terms of analyzing the culture now, I just am coming from the same place that I have been. I'm curious about what's going on. I'm curious about what people are thinking and feeling. And the Sydney Sweeney thing is interesting because it does remind me in certain ways, you called me a young woman, and I suppose by some measures I am, but I'm also a middle-aged woman, which means that I was alive to see the decline and fall of the moral majority in the, early 90s. And there was this sense of relief. I can kind of remember when it was like you could say things and you could crack jokes. You could find things funny. You could be irreverent. And it wasn't going to result in a materially impactful backlash. It wasn't going to make your life worse. There was just this kind of sense of unclenching as we moved from, the sort of twilight of the moral majority into the dawn of raunch culture, as characterized by MTV's Jackass, the American Pie films, the entire cinematic oeuvre of 1999, honestly, was sort of this free-for-all. And there was just this sense of incredible relief at the time. It was like, okay, yeah, we're going to make stuff. We're going to try things. We're going to have fun. And that moment, it doesn't feel exactly the same, but I think there are echoes of that happening now. And the Sydney Sweeney ad, I think, is a really good example. You have this, blonde, blue-eyed actress with big tits and just straightforward sex appeal, kind of flirting with the camera, flirting with the male gaze, cracking a dumb dad joke about jeans versus jeans. And it's like, I don't think that it's accurate to say that it's meaningless because people are like, stop making such a big deal out of it. It's just an advertisement. And the thing is, I think that all of this stuff signifies something, just as, the fact that advertising over the course of the past 10 years or so, you wouldn't have seen an ad like this. Instead, it would have been like a plus size, biracial, maybe sort of gender non-conforming person, definitely not making a lighthearted, playful pun. It would have been something much more self-serious. And that signified something about the culture, that advertising was the way it was for the past 10 years. And so the fact that this is happening now, I think also signifies something. But I think what it signifies is a sort of an unclenching. We're just going to relax and we're not going to make a big deal out of stuff, or at least we're trying not to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a pose of moral seriousness during the woke era. I think in advertising, cultural production, creative industries were being very didactic and in a particular direction. And I think they have definitely like relaxed on that post. I think your point about the moral majority is well taken. A lot of, many Americans under the age of 30, for example, I would say, have they don't almost have, they have no sense of what the power of the Christian right was even in Clinton's America, the New Democrats and Clinton, they had to, take certain cultural stances, signing the Defense of Marriage Act and other things, because this was a Christian country, and you assumed that people were Christian in public life and all these other things. And like a lot of that has just gone by on the wayside. More on the left and the broader culture than on the right. But even on the right, I can tell you in in younger right wing circles, there's a lot of yeah, I'm not going to go into the things I've seen, but let's just say that there is a freedom and lack of inhibition, which would shock the Ralph Reeds of the 1920s that this was the conservative, or the right, the youth, and so I think that that's a really great historical perspective to have, but there also has been, people have said that there also is like kind of like a counter reaction, and there's something called the woke right, which I just refuse to learn what that is, because it just seems like one of those terms that's just used more as an insult than a descriptive.
Yeah, I find it to be a flawed concept, personally.
Okay, can you tell me what it? I was gonna get my friend Colin. We haven't been able to schedule it. I was gonna get Colin Wright to talk about it actually on my podcast, because Colin writes about it, so I'm sure he's thought about it. I mean, it just seems kind of vacuous, but I don't know. I haven't really read about it. Tell me what it is.
So, I mean, the idea is that this is like a sort of a cancel culture, for lack of a better word, emerging on the right, and that, that employs all the same tactics as the left did in sort of the peak woke years. And the thing that I think is missing from the analysis of this is that the tone is very different. It is not self-deprecating. It's tongue-in-cheek. It's trollish. It's sort of like, okay, this is a weird deep cut, but you've seen the movie Home Alone, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's this moment where, let's see, Harry, played by Joe Pesci, has a spider on him, and Marv, played by Daniel Stern, grabs a crowbar and tries to kill the spider, but what he does is he hits Harry with a crowbar. And it's like a very sincere, earnest hitting with a crowbar. Harry gets up, grabs the crowbar, and starts hitting Marv with it. He says, "How do you like it?" And I really think that what we're seeing now is, like, from the right, is the equivalent of Harry grabbing the crowbar and just like kind of beating on him with it in this insincere way. It's just like, how do you like it? How do you like receiving this medicine that you've been forcing down everybody else's throats for the past 5 years? And that's what the woke right is. It's taking the tactics from the left that have been weaponized against them since, Trump's first White House tenure, and just opportunistically turning it back on the people who made it into a weapon in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I mean, some people, Chris Rufo, is a big. I mean, he's a player, obviously. I do think I tend to lean more towards, like, obviously, kind of like, I would say obviously, but I think people can tell, like, more libertarian tendency in some ways on the right, on the cultural issues. I'm just like, whatever, like, do your own thing, but, this censoriousness, this payback, people like Rufo will argue, and I actually just empirically, I think probably it's true. It's like, how do you get liberals interested, not liberal, but like whatever, like the dominant cultural left, really interested in free speech without scare quotes? Remember when the left was remember when everyone would do free speech, but there would be scare quotes, and it's like right coded. Like there was a period where free speech, those two like words were right coded. Now, after the pro-Palestine protests, and some of the things the Trump administration has been doing, canceling people basically for being pro-Palestine, all of a sudden, freedom of speech is, okay, you know what? We get it now, So, I do think there is a point where for some people, you just have to show them how the weapons that they use can be turned against them. And that's the way that you can, people can understand, like, this is going to be abused. The moral people are not always going to use these, tools of basically public coercion that you're employing on them, right? Remember the whole thing about, you have a right to what you say, but you don't have to right to be an asshole. So, if someone fires you, you're just an asshole. Like, all of a sudden, they're not saying those sorts of, like, meme cartoons. I do not see, these, like, I'll say far left cultural commentators, although, like, they often have perches at places like New York Times or New Republic or wherever, they're not passing those around now because it's being weaponized against them. And, I think at some point we just have to, like, understand, like, do some sort of ceasefire and be like, you know what, like, it's just never going to end. The cycle will never end. Someone's got to break the cycle.
Yeah, I've said this myself online, and I'm trying to think what controversy it was. It was something where the right was going insane. I think it might have been when James Comey posted a picture of seashells on a beach that said, like,
oh yeah.
And I was like, this is ridiculous. This is just as dumb as, some of the dumbest left-wing freakouts over, like, say, the, people making the OK symbol. That was a symbol of white supremacy. And someone came into my replies and said, but, like, they did it to us. It's time, like, why do you think this should stop now? And I said something like, I don't know, dude, but at some point, like, somebody is going to just have to decide to bite the bullet and be the change they wish to see in the world, or we really do never get out of this discourse cycle.
Yeah. So, I mean, you got the spot at the Free Press. You still write for UnHerd. You're still out there. You write at other places like Reason now and then. But do you think let's say, like, let's project forward to, like, 2030. Do you think it's possible that you're mostly going to be a novelist again, and that this whole will kind of fade away? Do you think that we will have a ceasefire? Do you think that we're in it for a while, going back and forth, and kind of, I mean, part of it is, like, driven by new technology, the cancel culture, social media swarms and stuff like that. And I don't know if we've really grappled with the technological change combined with the way human psychology is, and what's that's going to cause.
Yeah, well, I think that the great thing about culture writing, and maybe also the terrible thing about it, is that culture persists irrespective of what's happening politically. I mean, there's a certain amount of, and I guess there's a debate, is culture downstream from politics, or is politics downstream from culture, or is it actually a two-way street? But the fact is that, we're always going to have, irrespective of what's happening politically, we're going to have, like you said, technology, and social trends, and different, economic anxieties, or I don't know, world events influencing how we interact with each other. I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting right now, and it really has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with technology, is the fact that Gen Z is not dating and not having sex and not pairing off. And that is something that I think is very interesting. I think the kind of fear of intimacy that you see in in younger generations, I think that's very interesting. That's something that I'm going to continue to be writing about for as long as, I don't know, people are dating and coupling off and having sex. And so I don't think that the culture beat is going anywhere, but what I would like is to continue doing what I'm doing, which is both. Obviously you're not super familiar with my novels, and that's fine. But, like, what I write about through the lens of fiction and what I write about through the lens of journalism is basically the same stuff. I'm just sort of trying to answer the same questions from two different angles. And I think that my work is very much in conversation with itself in that way. So hopefully I'll continue to get to do both.
So, one of the things that, so you're talking about, like, sex and gender and stuff like that. And obviously, in terms of the woke, arc, there was the sex arc, and there was the race arc. I think in terms of periodicity, the feminist sex arc probably came a little, more, its kind of rise came more before maybe like 2018. And then the race stuff kind of crested with BLM, So, I mean, basically it was like mostly Black, but not exclusively. But, so we have the race and the sex. Obviously, as a white woman, I'm talking like a woke person now, like as a white woman, as a cishet white woman or whatever the hell, right? You have like certain views or certain like insights into sexual dynamics and stuff like that. And I'm Gen X. I grew up in a time when we heard things like affirmative consent. In terms of like the relationship between sex and power, and there's a certain context of like third wave feminism that occurs. I do wonder. So we have lived, our generation. You're elder millennial. I am Gen X. We have lived in a time where basically we don't really remember before feminism. Even if feminism wasn't dominant, it was part of the conversation. So women's lib, et cetera, right? We don't remember the 1950s before feminism. And so this is part of the conversation. And there's been like these swings back and forth, I feel. You're talking about Sydney Sweeney and her frank sexuality. And, I think part of the problem that I have, not the problem, but that I get confused by feminism is, women are like, oh, that's objectifying women, or feminists are, quote unquote, feminists. And I'll do quote unquote because I don't know, there's different types of feminists. But then they'll be like, oh, well, she's like, she's empowered. She's owning her sexuality. And like, I don't really understand, like, how do you make these judgments of what is what? Where's that coming from? So maybe I lack a little bit of like theory of mind because they're just all over the place. It's like, okay, you just think that, but I mean, where's that coming from? And, you just alluded to, the, kind of like this stuff about Gen Zoomers, okay? And how they just like keep to themselves. I have friends who are Zoomer male. Actually, I have a friend who's a younger millennial. And what he told me, like his narrative is basically near the end of the second Obama term, campuses got transformed. And like the whole awareness of rape culture. And he said just a lot of men were just, a lot of his peers, and including himself, just decided to just stay away. Just like they didn't want to deal with it. It was like too risky. Especially with the women on campus, like maybe off campus would be a little easier, but you never know if they're college students anyway, because there's repercussions, right? So this has like created like kind of a toxic dynamic. But recently, the other week, I saw a friend of mine was talking about like, someone that I know not well in Silicon Valley was basically making very, very coarse generalizations about women, how they're conformists and they don't think for themselves. So then there's like anti-feminist performance, anti-feminist like things that you're seeing. Seems like very, very polarized. So I, obviously like it's not surprising that younger generations are having issues coupling up when it seems like women are going in one direction, accepting certain like kind of worldview, and men, young males are reacting in another way. And I will say one last thing, in terms of like how Gen Z is very different than my generation and to a great extent yours. I know a fair number in technology. I know a fair number of gay men Zoomers. Okay. They have never tried to be straight. Like some of them have never been to a straight bar. Like their world is very, very gay inflected. And when I talk to them, it's great. Like they have like none of the hangups, and obviously, but they also don't know a lot of things about straight male culture and what we have to deal with because they never tried to be us. They also like understand women deeply on a certain level, although they don't at all on another level. So you have these subcultures that are emerging among the younger generation. And so, as I've got to know them, I have to say, I'm like, oh yeah, I get why there's all of this like polarization, because they get to choose who they hang out with. And sometimes the consequences of stepping outside your lane or your comfort zone can be really bad because someone can say, oh, they did this bad thing, I mean, so, and to some extent, I don't blame them. That's what I got to say.
Okay.
I mean, like, do you think like, I guess what I'm saying is like, I feel like a lot of the commentators are just like, oh, they're just on the internet and, they don't get out there, But like, there's a lot of exogenous legal and cultural conditions that led us to where we are. It's not like just like Snapchat magically turns you into an antisocial freak,
Right. So I do think that maybe broad strokes, one of the things we're seeing that has been really transformative to the way that the sexes interact, and especially the way young people interact, is that there's been a push, and some of it has actually been coming top down from the government, and then some of it has been kind of more grassroots in the culture, to demonize male sexuality and to stigmatize it as inherently predatory. And the problem is that this is being done from a sort of a both political and I guess it is mostly political, and and maybe a little bit from like a kind of a utopian feminist perspective. And the problem is that it doesn't map onto the reality of what anybody actually wants. And you saw this in various ways over the course of the past 10 years or so. Like during the Biden administration, it became like a big thing to kind of overstate the prevalence of minority sexualities and sexual orientations, and to normalize everything from not just like casual sex, yes, but also kink, and paraphilias and so on. The idea was that if you were the average person, if you were like the average heterosexual person who just wants to have basically a monogamous relationship with a person of the opposite sex, that this was, I don't know, it was odd, it was weird, it was like distasteful, it was basic. And so there was that, and then there was also the fact that men, who do default tend to want to pursue, and women default tend to want to be pursued, that dynamic was basically treated as toxic and something that needed to be eradicated, even though it remained the preference, like low key, for the vast majority of people. And I do think that it created this situation in which people didn't stop wanting what they wanted, but they did start to feel bad about what they wanted. Like that was what the messaging accomplished. It didn't change anybody's orientation or anybody's desires, but it did inculcate a sense that what they desired was something to be ashamed of, something to be embarrassed about, something to be resisted. And you see this continuing in, for instance, I mean, like this summer, if you look at the commentary on sex and dating and relationships that's coming out of, for instance, the New York Times, this has been like the summer of straight women's discontent. It's, like, I'm so embarrassed that I desire men. It's so inconvenient and horrible that I desire men. And that's very much, I would say, the millennial liberal woman's kind of the narrative that's being pushed. And then as in a kind of a backlash to that, you do see this like trad thing happening amongst younger women in more right wing or conservative spaces, which I think is a direct reaction against that. It's basically like, no, I want the traditional thing, and I shouldn't have to be ashamed of wanting the traditional thing. I've been rambling for a while, and I don't think necessarily making a lot of sense. But basically, I think that like there's been, I don't want to say a conspiracy, that makes it sound more organized than it is, but a cultural impulse to like stigmatize what is baseline most people's default sexuality. And that we're seeing now a lot of kind of dysfunctional stuff happen as a result.
Yeah, and like obviously there's other things which like it's outside purview of this podcast, like okay, like what does ubiquitous porn do to people, the younger generations, like because a lot of, I mean, I didn't, dating myself, but I didn't grow up with that. So obviously, and then I like, there are like young men that I know, it's like they were like watching like pretty hardcore stuff before they were even puberty. And, I don't know. I mean, that's like, I think we're still getting to grapple with that. In terms of what you're talking about, I was talking to a friend of mine about this. There's variation, there's people with different preferences and stuff like that. I think one of the problems that I have seen in the cultural discourse is when people act like their own situation in life and their preferences are just incredibly widely applicable, and then they'll write a think piece about it. And it's just like a lot of people just disagree with your premise, right? And it's why can't we just, I don't know, why can't we just like accept that there's different types of people out there? There's going to be different types of relationships. Isn't that the whole point? Instead of like, we need to like have a discussion. Okay, like I'm like, honestly, like I'm just gonna be straight up. Like I just get sick about women who say, men should just go to therapy. I'm just like, look, you go to therapy. That's your thing. I'm not judging, but like most of us aren't going to do that. Okay, some of us will, but most of us aren't. It's like sometimes I feel like women are supposed to have the social intelligence, and I'm just like, if you have the social intelligence, why don't you get like that? We're just like not interested in that for reasons because we are who you are. Like, we don't like not cry very often because like we're trying really hard. It's just not who we are for a lot of us. That's just how it is, And I think sometimes guys, sometimes they do the same thing. They project, and I'm just like, that's just how they are. Just like accept it, or like on average, which I think used to be kind of accepted. Like don't overthink it. And when you're talking about like queer identities and kinks and all this stuff, again, I just remember a gay friend of mine. We're still friends, but he was like, I think like everyone should explore kink. And I'm like, everybody? I mean, I'm not even being judgy, but I'm just like, everybody is just like, come on, man. Like just don't be persecuted. I feel like, there's tolerance, and then there's like, okay, we have to like make this the new norm. So you're talking about the moral majority. I think in some ways, like when it comes to sex and gender, there was an attempt to create kind of a moral or an ethical majority. But the reality is diversity is still with us. It was always with us. And it's just been an awkward fit. And so I think like you have these, like you're writing about affirmative consent, right? And I think that's, as you said, it's the law of the land in Canada. I'd forgotten about this. And this started when I was a teenager, like hearing about affirmative consent where you have to get permission. But the reality is like most people have forgotten about this, I mean, it's just like, it's not part of your day to day. Like if you're married, I mean, what are you gonna, you know what I'm saying? Like that's not, so this is like very, very like artificial situations where all of a sudden you realize, oh, this is the framework in Canada or like on this campus or whatever. And it's very like one size fits all, I feel. That, as as like everyone, I think most of the listeners know younger listeners, there are people who they're interested in a little bit of performative coercion, shall we say that, And so like, how does, I mean, there are ways affirmative consent can work, but it's just an awkward fit, one size fit in terms of like the diversity of human sexuality, right? Like sexual relations. And I thought that, if I was a teenager in the 1990s, if I project forward, I would just think, we'll figure this out in a generation, with like our like, thinking caps on and information technology. And I just feel like we're even more muddled than we were. Maybe that's not fair.
No, I think that we're in a weird moment right now. And when you were talking about how like there's the demonization from each side of each sex, I think that what you are pointing at is something that has been lost, which is just kind of an essential sense of fondness between the sexes, and a fondness based on the fact that men and women are different generally, and this used to be understood as like a complimentary thing, even though it was often frustrating. I'm thinking of this line, and I think it's Emma by Jane Austen, which written during the Regency era, so we're going way back. There's this moment where this group of people is looking at a ballroom that needs to be cleaned out so they can host a dance there. And, the men are like, this is great, we could do it tomorrow. And the women are like, it needs to be really thoroughly cleaned. And then there's this line says, and at this moment, each of the women thought to themselves, men never know if a thing is dirty or not. And the men thought, women will have their little nonsenses and needless cares. And I've always really loved that line. It speaks to the fact that women and women tend to be wired differently, see the world slightly differently, that these are generally understood, or were generally understood, to be complementary things. But one of the things that you've seen over the course of the past, I would say 10 years or so, especially in feminist discourse, is like actually the way men are is bad. It's toxic masculinity. It needs to change. Men are not fit to live in the world as it is right now. They need to become basically more like women. And this is where you see like men need to go to therapy, men need to talk about their feelings more, men need to like medicate to, regulate their aggression, whatever. Like, boys need to be medicated so they'll sit still in class. And we are moving into a world, and have been for a while, where sort of more naturally feminine traits are a better fit. Basically, we're more at home sitting still. We're more at home focusing. There's less room to go out and do war and punch somebody in the face and resolve your problems through like violence and aggression. And the thing is, this is at once true, but when you start to extrapolate it out into trying to like make men behave in a more feminized way in their relationships, what we're finding is that like women are asking for this, and then they get it and they don't like it. It's not sexy. It's not attractive.
Yeah. It's beware what you ask for. I will say, speaking of, again, like the generations, I'm an old man now, middle-aged, and so I do have I work in tech, and so I engage with the youth, and I have had multiple conversations with straight men who complain. I mean, I'm going to give you an age, like 23, 24. Like, this is really what I'm talking about. I don't experience this too much with 30 somethings. 23, 24, they've come up in, I mean, they're their puberty was after Facebook, social media was there. So the way they complain about women, and they're like, sometimes I'll be like, bro, you're straight, deal with it. I mean, you can play for the other team. You want to. I mean, they just like, well, what do you mean? I'm just like, that's how they are. This is not like some bug that they've been brainwashed. This is how women. It's because partly it's like, some men are in these like online subcultures with the other guys, and yeah, they might engage. I mean, to me, it's weird because I feel like, in the West, like this is not true in the Islamic world, for example. You go to school and you socialize with girls, you kind of get to understand that they're different. And I'm like, what is going on with some of these young men? I don't have the similar experiences with young women, obviously, because I don't have like same sort of like, interpersonal intimacy that way. But I'm assuming some of the similar happens. And I think, from my understanding, a lot of it is online cultures, bulletin or whatever, like Snapchat forums or groups. There's actually like a re-segregation in a way that's happening, I feel, because of the internet. Also, some of the, men are dangerous and all rapists, or like women will accuse you of rape. Like some of the guys like say like, it's like they think every woman is going to accuse them of rape. And so they're like, they're vol cells. Like that's, like they'll say like, I'm a vol cell. And I'm just like, no, you're just a pussy. It's just like, come on, man. I mean, like, you're not going to like, like every, there's life is about taking risks. And so, I hope, like I have sons, the Gen Alpha. And so I do sons, and I have a daughter, she's also Gen Alpha. I do worry about that, like old man worries. I'm just like, what's going on here? I do have to say, like, I've seen technology, I think, be an accelerant of this sort of like online segregation and separation. So we have about 10 minutes. So I want to like actually tack to something else because in terms of cultural differences, you still write for UnHerd, I think sometimes. You have produced a lot of work for, and UnHerd is mostly based out of it's officially based out of the UK, but it has a lot of American writers. I've written for UnHerd. It's kind of like Quillette, which is Australian, based in Australia, but has a lot of an American audience. In terms of culture commentary and culture writing, I have wondered, okay, cultures, sometimes like things land very differently still between England and the US in terms of the way, like for example, let's use an easy example, the word cunt, okay? That has like a very different connotation in the US versus England, where it's like just way less polite in the US, right? But people, my British friends have telling me like homogenization, like basically their culture is becoming an extension of American culture. As a culture writer, do you think that that's true? Or have you seen the homogenization yourself over the last, on the order of a decade? Like, how do you feel about that? I just ask because like sometimes I have seen things where I'm just like, you just don't know that idiom, and that does not translate. And I get why you're confused. And I wonder about that. Are we going beyond that? Is everyone becoming American? What do you think? I mean, Brits complain about this. Americans don't care.
Yeah, well, I mean, America has always, to a certain extent, been a cultural exporter, right? Like, we have cool stuff and people like to copy us. And this is why you have like cowboys in Japan and so on. But I think that something interesting that has happened over the past 10 years, yeah, that sounds about right, is that we've started exporting our politics, not just our culture. And that is a little bit weird because other countries do not have the same issues by virtue of the way their governments are designed, by virtue of their histories that we do in the US. And yet, we did Black Lives Matter. And so the UK did Black Lives Matter, and like Denmark did Black Lives Matter. One of my favorite things recently was there's that brief like no kings in America thing. And that, started flooding out into the wider world. And I was like, are the English going to pick this up unironically? But no, it was, they made it no tyrants instead. It's like, okay, I see what you guys did there. Is everybody becoming American? I don't think it's actually quite that. And something that, like, here's an interesting example. So the word spaz is a very bad word in the UK and in Australia, I think also like Commonwealth countries, because it's considered like a slur for disabled people. It's not in the US. Like the etymology of that term or the origins of it as a slang term are completely different. Doesn't have any stigma attached to it. But because we do live in a moment where the internet has caused this kind of blurring of boundaries between cultures and between nations. So when Beyonce and Lizzo, I guess it was maybe a year or two ago, released songs that contained the word spaz used in the colloquial way of like African-American vernacular English. So I'm about to spaz means I'm about to have a fight with somebody. You had activists in Australia and the UK got really offended and instigated petitions to make to protest against these songs, like you should change these songs. And both of these performers capitulated, which I thought was very interesting. And it was, obviously it was a certain moment, both in terms of like the tolerance for somebody who was willing to cause offense, and also in terms of technology making it easier than ever to censor something in real time. They were able to yank Beyonce's single off Spotify and just stick a different word in there. And it's funny because now it feels like if you heard the song in its original incarnation, or even if you didn't, and you hit that line, there's like this little hiccup. It doesn't quite work. There's this sense that something was altered. It's like the glitch in the Matrix. And but they were able to do that very easily, and so they did. And I think that what we're seeing there is this sort of homogenization of culture that is visible in a lot of different milieus. It's not just in terms of like, oh, something that causes offense in one place is going to cause offense every place, or our political movements here in the United States are going to replicate everywhere else in the world. It's things like if you go to any major city and you walk down the street, you're going to see the same stores. There's going to be a Sephora, there's going to be a McDonald's, there's going to be an H&M, and so we're now in this moment where like Milan feels very much like Paris, feels very much like New York City, feels very much like Tokyo. It's like everything is kind of starting to become samey, and it's not everywhere. But in places that have become like kind of global cities, it's definitely happening.
Yeah, it's like an archipelago of globalization. A sort of friend of mine who, has traveled a lot for work has said, like, definitely you can see the same touchstones. So yeah, I mean, we're closing out here. I wanted to kind of like end on just, kind of like an open-ended question about like, obviously, so you were writing in 2020, and you were taking a lot of incoming. We've all seen it on the internet. Obviously, that period, a lot of things have cooled down. Wokeness, like its kind of cultural hegemony, has really abated. Not everywhere. We didn't even get into YA. That's like a long discussion, so we'll avoid that. That's a massive thing. I will say, like, I heard that the average age of a YA reader is now in their mid 30s. That's a little weird to me. Okay, that's weird, but that's a whole thing. Like maybe some other future day we'll talk about that. But and then we're talking about the woke right and all that stuff, and we don't need to get into it, but there's a lot of sexism, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of anti-Semitism on X, on Twitter. Like a lot of stuff has come back. Do you feel optimistic though about where the culture is going in terms of, let's say, let's do the reason slogan, like free minds and free thought, that sort of thing, which is maybe like 1990s cultural liberalism, whatever, or maybe like the anti-George W. Bush cultural liberalism, like Dixie Chicks era, like that sort of thing, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, how are you feeling in terms of optimism, pessimism? Let's wait and see.
Oh, I'm curious to see how it all works out. I think that, the culture is, I don't know, we don't really have a monoculture anymore. There's so much content. And, we don't really have movie stars anymore. We have micro celebrities. And this is something that's happened to us because of the internet, because of social media, and it's not political. It's just, a function of the technology having changed the way that we consume and create. And so I have no predictions. I cannot imagine. I think, like everything from technology to AI is going to probably have a transformative impact on culture, on art, and so on. But what that's going to be, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be the robot apocalypse, but that's as far as I'll go in terms of predicting.
All right. Well, Kat, people can find you at the Free Press, still at UnHerd, Feminine Chaos on Substack, and I'll have all the links. See you on social media, getting into it with people. You got to jump, and so you're a busy lady, so I will let you go. It was a pleasure talking to you, and maybe I'll see you at the next Hereticon. We'll see.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was nice to chat.
This podcast for kids